You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Terminó en Axel Schwarzenegger.
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Life moves on, folks. Would have been nice for a glasso on a Saturday night. I'm Dwayne Rollins, back from a brief break yesterday. Joining me, Kevin Laramee, as always. Rudi Schuller is on the line. We'll get to him in a minute. How you doing, Kevin?
I am doing pretty good, Dwayne. Finally catching up on a little bit of sleep since the big game on Saturday, and finally warm, which, Rudi, I have to agree with you, the real MVP were the hand warmers on Saturday.
They were actually foot warmers for me because my hands were nice and covered up. I had gloves on. They were in my pockets out in the outdoor press box. But if those hand warmers didn't become foot warmers, I think I might have been missing a toe or two at this point.
Yeah, it was a cold night for sure. I do apologize to any Americans that I insulted over the past little while, complaining about the weather, because it was pretty cold. I'll give you that. Rudi, I don't know where to even start with this. Actually, I do know where to start with this. There's an old adage in TFC circles, and it's born by years of observing this, that former players always come back to bite TFC in the ass. And there is a former player there's no more former player than Stefan Frei. Is it right to say that Frei's performance was the ultimate karma for some really bad management for the past 8 years or so prior to now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, it makes for a good narrative. Frei was the MVP. He was my MVP vote. But I don't think it was karma or anything like that. I think the karma was the results of over those 8 years, to be quite honest. I think this is just the fact that they got to the MLS Cup and they hosted it was kind of a reflection of what the team has become. So I agree that it makes for a nice little narrative that Stefan Frei was the one that had to do it. But let's be honest, I think TFC beat themselves on that night. And Seattle's very, very lucky, to be quite honest.
Yeah, no, and this is a funny thing that I've obviously done some reflection on this in the days ahead, and I'll share my thoughts in the block after Rudi's interview. But as simply as you can put it, what did go wrong for them on the night in terms, like, obviously the simple answer is they just couldn't put the ball in the net. But what's the less simple answer, Rudi?
Well, is there a less simple answer than that? I think maybe relying a little too heavily on Giovinco and Josie Altidore up top, maybe done them in a little bit, because I think that if they were able to get a little bit more bodies into attack more consistently, then they would have been able to do what they were doing, all playoffs long, and that was scoring goals for fun. We saw TFC do that in the previous series when it wasn't just Giovinco and Altidore scoring goals or creating goals. Yes, it was the two of them that were the main catalysts, but that's what they're paid to do. But you were getting contributions from Benoit Cheroux, Tosaint Ricketts, Justin Morrow, and so on and so forth. So I think just the fact that those two top guys were isolated so much against Roman Torres and Chad Marshall, and having Ozzy Alonso come back and just basically brutalize Giovinco and without any help, I think that was kind of led to the downfall of not getting enough quality shots on it. Because yes, they got 19 shots off and they got 7 out of directly on goal that Frei had to make saves on. But how many good saves did Frei really have to make? There were quite a few. Well, yeah, exactly. There were quite a few. There were quite a few sitters. Well, not quite a few. There were at least 1 or 2 sitters that they missed the net completely. I'm just thinking of Altidore's first chance in the second minute or whatever. I think it was partially deflected. That goes in. It's a completely different game. Maybe not. Maybe the end result is still the same, but it forces Seattle to come out of their shell, and it opens. It gives TFC a little bit of confidence. Which what we've seen is that once they score one, they can score in buckets, and then I think we would have seen a little bit more of an exciting game. It may not have been, like I said, it may not have been different in the end, but I think it would have been a different game at least.
A player for Seattle that had a great game as well, Roman Torres, the defender,
Mhm.
which was basically the wall in front of Jovinko in the entire game. We usually talk about skills and how skills like Jovinko was able to uh, find ways around physical attributes. But on this day, the 6'2" defender won the battle. How impressive was Torres for you, Rudy?
He was very impressive. He was all over the pitch in the back line. He was basically making up for the fact that Chad Marshall has basically no legs left. Chad Marshall's never been the most mobile guy to begin with, but he's been a very smart defender over his career. That's why I think he won MLS Defender of the Year 3 times, which is a record. There's a reason for that because he's got a very high soccer IQ. His positioning is great, and he talks well and he combines well with his partner. Roman Torres, who's actually the bigger of the two guys, just size wise, was actually the more mobile of the two guys too, and was kind of everywhere. And you put Torres against Jovinko, and of course it's a mismatch for various reasons, but you'd think it would be a mismatch in TFC's favor, just because Jovinko is so shifty and has found ways around players that size and whatnot. But I do think that Jovinko playing with not 100%, and I'm willing to say that he was not 100% in this game to start the game, not even to finish. I think he's been off for a few weeks. Added to the fact that Torres has been just absolute in dominant form lately, it just led to a long night for TFC's attack. And he wasn't just squaring up against Jovinko. He was also doing it against Altidore too. Altidore has been bullying defenders all playoffs long, and not even just in the playoffs. The second half of the season, basically. He wasn't able to do it against either of those guys, and Roman Torres is a large part of why. Well, I mean, large part of why they won, but of course he also scored the winning penalty. So if it wasn't for Stefan Fry's once in a lifetime save, he would have been the MVP.
No, exactly. Just to go back to Jovinko for a second, Rudy, do you think the playoffs, the last few weeks, the hard coverage that he has been receiving, fouls, getting kicked every single game, do you think it took a toll out of Jovinko over the last few weeks?
It absolutely took a toll. I think it started in the Montreal series where that's been the Impact's kind of way to defend him against him now is to just basically kick the holy hell out of him, right? And fair to them, if they can get away with it without being red carded or without being reprimanded, then that's a legitimate strategy. We saw it in August when the Impact played at BMO Field and he went out injured. And then he was out for a good 5-6 weeks or whatever it was, and then we saw it again in the playoffs. The game at the Big O, he was bullied. He was allowed to be bullied, and that's fine, whatever. And like I said, it's the refereeing was the same on both sides. But the fact of the matter is he's not a very big guy, so those injuries are going to pile up a lot faster on a body like his than a body like Josie Altidore's. So. When you're allowed to physically punish him, then yeah, he's gonna lose that little extra edge, and you could see it. His first touch was off the entire game, which I put Jovinko's first touch against anybody's in the league, and when he's bringing down balls and it's hitting off his shin rather than his boot, and he's taking that extra touch where it runs away from him, the ball runs away from him. You have to just think that something was wrong. I think a lot of it was mental too, because I think he was expecting a lot more protection from the refs, but. I do think that there was something physical going on there as well. So it's not an excuse because TFC is a very deep team and they've won without him. Of course, they're not as good, not nearly as good without him at his best. But he was still there. He's still playing very well most of the time. He almost scored a goal himself. Almost set up a couple others. So it's not an excuse, but it is a legitimate reason as to why TFC wasn't at their best.
Rudy, Laura Armstrong just tweeted out this morning, and this is a bizarre tweet. I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but if not, I'll just get you to react to it. Jovinko suggests the Argos also playing at BMO Field was at least part of the reason why he struggled with cramps this season. Get your thoughts on that and just where you think Jovinko's head is right now.
Yeah, I actually saw that. I wasn't able to get up to the training ground for the locker room cleanout, but that was a very interesting thing. Usually those, you guys know, those year-end postmortems are usually just so doldrum, and it's nothing ever comes out of it. So that's a very interesting tidbit, especially since all the praise that we've been seeing the BMO Field grounds crew get for making the pitch look as good as possible under those strenuous conditions. I don't know where to start with that because I don't know how he sees it. I don't know what is leading to his thinking. He basically said that he didn't have any cramps last year, and the Argos weren't there. He's having them this year. He was struggling with them this year in the second half of the season, and the Argos were there. So that's the only difference between the two seasons. That could be true. It could also be true that playing in this extreme cold weather could have led to those cramps as well. I mean, that is a side effect of playing in below freezing weather. And as I said, it's a smaller body, so things can happen more quickly to him than anybody else. And we saw it on the Seattle side as well. We saw a lot of those guys going down with cramps, and they play on turf, so which is, I'd argue, is a lot worse than grass, even with the Argos there. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to say he's making an excuse because I don't think he's that kind of person. Maybe there's some truth to it, because there probably are some divots that we can't see from high up that look okay on TV, but he can notice when he's stepping. I think he might be discounting the cold weather a little bit, because I do think that would lead more to cramping than any divots would. If anything, divots would create rolled ankles and whatnot. So it kind of speaks to the overall issue that it's never going to go away, regardless of how good the pitch looked over this, the last 2 or 3 months. That this issue is always going to be there as long as the Argos and TFC are sharing a field. So, yeah, I don't know what more to say about it, because again, we're just basing it off a single tweet or a single series of tweets from reporters at the Kia training ground. But right now, it's not a good look, is it, for the superstar of the team to say that. So we'll see how in the coming days and weeks how things play out in that regard.
Yeah, when you and I have talked off air about what I'm about to ask next, and I think I've said applied stuff like this in the past on the show as well. There are rumblings out there that Giovinco may want to go back to Italy, that he may want to go to prove himself to the Italian coaches so that he can get back in the mix for 2018. I think we can all understand that. He does have a year left on the contract. It would be very difficult for anyone to walk away from $7 million, because he would not get anywhere close to that in Italy. What are your thoughts on Giovinco's long-term future with this club? Do you think that he, once he calms down a little bit, that he might still come back and finish that contract out? I'll say outright, I don't think he'll be back for a second contract. But do you think he'll play a third year here?
It's very, very hard to tell. I'd lean towards yes, just because of what you see off the field. He loves the city. He loves the fact that he can have a living here without being hounded. That was one of the main reasons he came over from Italy. It's just that he wasn't able to walk the town with his kids and not be hounded by fans and the media and whatnot. Of course, he still gets recognized, and I'm sure he likes that. But obviously it's a much different thing in Toronto than it is in Turin. It's tough to read Sebastian Giovinco just because he never does interviews in English. I know he speaks English. I've heard him speak English. But when it comes to media, he never does them. He never speaks in English. He always lets it go through the filter of the translator, who I'm sure is not translating it 100%. And there's always some stuff that's lost in translation. And it's tough. It's tough to get a read on a player like that, just because you're not seeing his true self. You're seeing it through filters. You're seeing it through pre-selected kind of interviews and whatnot. And you can't just see him in his natural habitat. We see his social media. We hear stories and we hear it through other players. But ultimately, the best way to get a read of a player is to talk to him and talk to him in his native language. And since there's very few Italian speakers in the Toronto media, it's going to be a lot tougher than if it was a Josie Alter or Michael Bradley, who also has, of course, rumors swirling around him. So I'd still lean towards that he's going to stay. In fact, I'd say it's probably 80 or 90%. I think it's a very large percentage. I think he does enjoy the lifestyle here, and he enjoys the fact that he can play and is an automatic starter, and he's the best player in the league, and all the stuff that comes with that. But he is a competitor, and I think he does want to show what he can do for Italy, and maybe that does hurt him a little bit. It's a little scaled down version of the Defoe saga. Of course, there's a whole lot of different issues going on there, but it's tough to say. I wouldn't rule it out completely, but I'd say I'd be leaning toward the fact that he'll be back in 2017. And I think it's actually a 4-year contract, so maybe even 2018 as well.
When you look at the MLS Cup as a whole, outside of the game, Rudi, the week leading up to it and the day of, what what impressed you? What got your attention, or your really got your fancy tickled by
You know what?
anything this week?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
It's all good.
It was just the media coverage in Toronto. And I'm not even talking about the sports media like TSN, Sportsnet, whatnot, because they're going to cover that anyway. And it's a big story in the sports world. I'm talking about your CTV morning shows and all those shows that have nothing to do with soccer. I'm watching the weather report on the random Tuesday before the game. We're talking 4 or 5 days before the game kicks off. And in the weather report, how they have the 5-day forecast on the Saturday. They have a little TFC logo on there saying, okay, this is going to be the weather. This is what we're expecting the weather forecast to be on Saturday evening at kickoff. When you're seeing that kind of mainstream attention, that is impressive to me. It's not spots on TSN, who was obviously the broadcaster, or Sportsnet broadcast the regional games. It's when you have your weathermen talking about it, or you have you watch the daytime talk shows like The Social on CTV. They have Dwayne De Rosario on talking about it. That's a very, very weird thing to see, right? So when you have that kind of penetration in all forms of media, that just shows you how big an event was, at least in the Toronto area. And we saw the numbers. It resonated at least somewhat nationally as well. So we can talk about the events and all the things that MLS planned themselves, but they couldn't have planned for the media penetration that was just almost 100% at that point.
The Friday morning TFC scrum will be remembered forever.
Exactly.
Rudi, just quickly, if you look at the unprotected list for Toronto FC heading into the expansion draft today, few big names, but the one that stands out to me, and the one that brings out this question, will Toronto lose their goalkeeper?
That's a very good question. I think that the two big names that stood out for me, of course, you're talking about Clint Irwin, and Steven Beitashour was the other one. Beitashour, he actually said it in just a few minutes ago in his exit interview, said that he spoke to Tim Bezbatchenko, and it was it was a combination of his age and salary and whatnot that they thought he was a calculated risk. Now, of course, I don't think Bezbatchenko is going to lay all his cards out on the table, even to the player himself. So there may be backroom deals and whatnot going on. And the same thing for Irwin. We already know that Atlanta United is not going to need a goalkeeper. They're probably going to get Brad Guzan. They actually got Sean Johnson first, and then traded him away to NYCFC just because
for allocation,
Brad Guzan is sorry
for allocation in the
for allocation. Yeah, exactly. But he was supposed to be their first starting keeper because he's a Georgia native, and then a better keeper came along. That's just the way the sports world works. Brad Guzan comes along, and he's likely going to be signed in the coming weeks. So they're not going to be looking for a keeper, especially a guy like Clint Irwin's not going to be a backup keeper. So we're looking at Minnesota United, and they have no one on the roster. And I think they have like 3 guys signed, all from their NASL roster. They need to build a team, and fast. Now, whether TFC has an unspoken deal with them, we'll never know. But it's a very high risk, and I think that Minnesota could take a chance on him, and we could see Alex Bono be the starter, or TFC has to go in the market again. I'd say the chances are 50-50 at this point.
Yeah, it's a strange one indeed. And as Rudi said, there's always lots going on beneath the surface when you're talking about the expansion draft. Let's turn our attention to Seattle for a little bit. A lot of people will bring, purists especially, will bring up the anti-playoff stuff and that. But are they worthy champions?
Are they worthy champions?
Like overall year, put it all in context. Yeah.
Well, they're worthy MLS Cup winners. I subscribe to the fact that, of course, MLS Cup is the biggest trophy. It's just the way everything's set up. It's the way the culture in North America is set up. It's just ingrained in our blood, right? But I do allow for the fact that there can be multiple champions within a single season. So FC Dallas is a champion. TFC is a champion, as the Canadian champion. And, we see the U.S. Open Cup and the MLS Cup. So there are multiple champions. Seattle will gladly claim the biggest one. They did what they had to do on the night. It wasn't the prettiest, of course. We've seen a lot of ink spilled over how undeserving they are. I wouldn't say undeserving is the word, because they managed to stifle a TFC attack that scored 17 goals in the playoffs and actually set the record before the final of the number of goals in a single playoff run. So they did what they had to do. Was it cynical? Absolutely. Was it boring to watch at times or just awful to watch at times? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, you can't argue with the result. The result says that they are the MLS Cup champion. Deserve is such a broad brush. They did what they did. They did what they had to do, and that makes them deserving on the night. Whether they deserve all the plaudits they're getting, I'd say maybe it's a little too much just because of how the season's gone and the fact that they squeaked through. But that's the way the system is set up. You can't blame a team for playing the game by the rules. And Seattle played the game by the rules. Did they get lucky? Absolutely. I think they're very, very lucky. And a single goal by TFC probably would have, like I said off the top, probably would have changed the game completely. But that didn't happen. So on the night, I'd say if you had to force me to say if they're deserving, then yes, they're deserving. But I think it's such a broad term that I don't know if I could really bring it to justice. I think they play within the rules and they deserve kudos for that.
Well, at least all those long-suffering Sounders fans that were born on third and just came in on the wild pitch finally got their just rewards. Pass the salt, please. Rudy, I sort of attention away from the MLS Cup for a second. We mentioned Atlanta a minute ago, Atlanta, Minnesota, and I'm a bit concerned about what Minnesota United's going to look like, to be blunt. But just can I get your overall feelings on those two teams and how you'll think they'll launch next year?
Well, it's almost like night and day between those two teams, isn't it? You see Atlanta coming in 30,000 season ticket holders, I believe, or something like that. Full of ambition, full of money. Of course, they got a super rich owner, Arthur Blank, who people don't know is he was the guy who started Home Depot. So he's got all the money behind him. And they're spending it. They get Tata Martino as their coach, which is absolutely ridiculous in the context of MLS. A guy who's coached Barcelona and Argentina were his two last teams on his resume. They're spending money on DPs. They look like they got a first class stadium coming up. Of course, it's an NFL stadium, but it's probably going to be a Sounders situation where they're going to be looked at upon as equals. And they look to be coming right out of the gate, almost like in NYCFC, where they'll be very entertaining. I don't know what their defense is going to look like yet because they haven't seemed to sign a single defender yet. Maybe they got Michael Parkhurst. That's the only one so far. But they look to be a team that's going to be valuing attacking, and we should see a very exciting team. Now on the other side, it's a much more traditional way of building an expansion team with Adrian Heath, who's of course a former expansion team coach on his own right with Orlando City. They look to be going the more traditional route of filling it up with MLS guys who were left available for one reason or the other, and through trades and through drafts and whatnot. We haven't heard any kind of buzz on DPs or big or even just big foreign signings or even big local signings. Guys coming back from Europe from the American side. It's a very interesting dichotomy of two teams coming at the exact same time with polar opposite kind of mantras. So I'm very excited to see how they're going to play out. It wouldn't surprise me to see Atlanta challenging for a playoff spot in the East next year, just because I think the bottom of the East still isn't that great yet. Minnesota's going to have a tough go of it in the West. We might be looking at a Chivas USA opening season if they don't do a lot of stuff and fast. They have a lot of catching up to do at this point.
What's interesting to me, Rudy, now with the addition of money for every club in the TAM, targeted allocation money situation, seems like the club have more tools to have more depth. How would you build an expansion team? Do you rely on the expansion draft? Do you make sure that you build your depth with the more time you have, sign young DPs like Atlanta's doing, so you actually have more salary cap available for the other DPs because it's a young DP, it's separate. How would you build your team in 2016 heading into 2017?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. If you're going to sign DPs, sign them young. Honestly, I would leave no stone unturned. A lot of people can turn the nose up at the number of drafts, and I agree. It's ridiculous to have allocation draft, expansion draft, this draft, that draft. But that's just the reality of MLS, and you can't leave any stone unturned. If you can get a good player out of a draft, do it. If you can get a good player out of an allocation, do it. You got to throw a wide net out there and hope to catch a few fish, right? But you also have, like you mentioned, the targeted allocation money, the general allocation money, and the DP spots. I think those are where you build your spine. You get your good attackers, but you also get a good midfielder, a midfield general type, the Michael Bradley type or an Ozzy Alonso type, guys who can dominate in the middle of the park, because that's where, it's a cliche to say, but that's where soccer games are usually won and lost, right? So you want to build your spine with your big money guys, and then look to fill out the rest of your roster with the various mechanisms that MLS has in place. And the fact of the matter is, it requires spending money no matter what you do. And I'm not just talking about on player personnel. It's the coaching staff, it's the scouting staff, it's the athletic trainers, it's the training facilities and whatnot. Those are the little things, and you're seeing it. You've seen the cream rise to the top now in MLS, at least this season. Those are the things that kind of differentiate you from other teams when it comes to what you can spend on, because there's no salary caps on coaching. There's no salary caps on training facilities. There's no salary caps on scouting and analytics and all the tools that can help you get an edge. So if I were starting up an expansion side, I'd look to leave no stone unturned and not look down on any kind of mechanism that's going to possibly bring me an asset, whether it be a player or some kind of allocation to be traded for a player down the road. It's all about keeping your options open and looking to build your spine. And if there's anything I would keep my mind not as open about, is that I think my big money would be built on my spine, and then you can kind of worry about options on the rest of the team. So I kind of contradicted myself there a little bit, but not really, because I do think that the big money should be spent on the highest players that can have the biggest impact, and that is your strikers and your midfielders, and maybe a big bad defender if you really want to go that way. But it's always harder to find attackers than it is to find defenders. So if you're gonna spend your money, then that's where you spend it, and then the rest of all the other things I named, that will help you fill out your roster.
You mentioned analytics quickly in your last comments.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it came into play in the buildup of those two rosters? We all know how Tim Bezpachenko worked for the league and knew how to work a roster, how to build one in the Major League Soccer, but also is aware of analytics. Same for Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Was it something important in the building of those two rosters that we saw compete for the MLS Cup?
Absolutely. I mean, Bezpachenko came in 2013, and he, that was one of the things he mentioned. He mentioned getting an edge on the analytics side, because everyone knows the other sides, right? And everyone has the same sports science. They all have the same. You can all hire from the same pool of physiotherapists and whatnot. And everyone, coaching is it can only go so far, because in MLS you're almost surely going to hire a former MLS player, so the coaching pool is not as big as it might be elsewhere. So anything that can give you an edge, it kind of ties into my last point, right? Anything that gives you an edge. So if analytics can get you, another 2 or 3 goals a year, that's still 2 or 3 goals a year that could possibly change your entire team fortunes, right? And you look at the way Seattle and Toronto go about their business. They have 2 of the biggest analytics departments in the league. I'm not gonna sit here and say that analytics are the be all and end all. They are just another tool. It's funny to see old school guys rail against it, and then you see the opposite, where other people say that analytics are a huge deal. I think they're a big deal. I don't think they're as huge a deal as some of the newer school guys would say, but I definitely wouldn't write them off the way old school guys are doing as well. I think they're just another tool, and if you can utilize that tool properly and put the proper resources that can help you, then we see the results. We saw 2 teams that have embraced it earlier than others in MLS, and Seattle and Toronto, and they were the ones competing for MLS Cup. I do think that Toronto, did a little bit better with it, because I do think that TFC's roster is a little bit deeper, and I think it's actually honestly the deepest team in MLS. But just going back to my point, I do think that you see 2 teams that are spending as much money off the field as they are on the field in Seattle and Toronto, and that's where the edge is, and that's we immediately see the rewards, and I firmly believe that that's the way things are gonna go from here on out. You're gonna see outliers like Columbus making the MLS Cup final last year, but you're also gonna see the cream rise to the top more than often, and the cream being the teams that spend as much off the field as on the field. So analytics is one of those big things.
Well, Rudi, one of the things that I always do, and this is our final question for you, but one of the things that I always do at the end of each season to sort of I take a mental checklist of the teams, and I kind of get my hunch almost immediately following the season who my favorite for the next one will be. Obviously, lots plays out in the offseason, but if I were to make you pick a 2017 favorite off the top of your head right now, is it Toronto? Is it Dallas? Who do you think is best set up to be successful in 2017?
I think TFC is definitely set up to be successful in 2017. I think Seattle is as well. I think they're only going to get better in the offseason. Now they've got not that they didn't before, but they've got a core that can build around in Ladero and Morris. And if Dempsey can come back, if not, well, they'll replace him. They have the money, they have the ambition to do it. So that's a team that'll be there. And we'll see Dallas again because they're just so well built. The rest of the league is kind of a crapshoot. I think we'll see NYCFC up there again just because of their resources as well. But it's not going to be much different from previous years where you see certain teams kind of rise and fall as the season goes along. I don't think Chicago is going to be very good this year, just like they haven't been very good the last 2 or 3 years. I think they might be a little bit better. So I think the what we saw, the top and the bottom, it's going to be the same. We'll see Montreal put a good run in. I do think they're going to have to get younger. That's just the reality of the game. I think New York Red Bulls are well built to have another good regular season. I don't know if they're built well for the playoffs, as Ignacio Piatti so eloquently put it a few weeks ago. But I think you're going to see a lot of the same same old. And it sounds boring when I put it that way, but it's just the way it is. I think the better teams are being better now, and you'll see 1 or 2 teams make that push and 1 or 2 teams drop. But for the most part, you're going to see the same teams at the end of the year that you saw at the end of this year.
That is an interesting change in how MLS is working now, where maybe we are going to go to an era that more closely reflects the rest of the world in terms of the same teams year after year. Rudi Schuller from the Sporting News. Anything going on you want to promote real quick before we say bye?
It's all just end of year wrap ups and all that stuff. It's all out there already. We've got Ives Garlax writing some stuff, myself writing some stuff. It's all postmortem stuff and all that fun stuff at the end of the year. Now we're just looking at all these drafts and whatnot and building up to 2017. So we're already in the off season, which is kind of crazy to me. So that's what we're covering right now.
Off season in the MLS, funnest time of year. Rudi, thanks.
Oh yeah, thank you.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Welcome back. Kevin, you and I, because I was unable to do the show yesterday, didn't have a time to reflect ourselves on the MLS Cup. Obviously, it's a lot to digest, and having the extra day maybe helps a little bit. I'll start real quickly that, as a 10-year observer of TFC, and I've had a lot of people reach out and sort of offer condolences to me. It's like I'm surprised actually at how little the loss is weighing on me. And I think that has to do with just, it's hard to look at TFC's season in anything but other than the most pedantic way and not see it as a success. The playoff run was magical. It truly was, if you were a long-term TFC observer, and it didn't end with the fairy tale, ending, but nonetheless.
The closest thing that you could from the fairy tale ending, though. And I think the fact that Toronto hosted that MLS Cup has a big part, because you're not the only one. A lot of TFC fans are actually accepting. Of course, tears were shed, but they moved on and they can reflect positively. And I think because they had that moment of hosting it and the entire week leading up to it, they were able to have that celebration even before the game. I think played a huge part in the acceptance. And look, we went to penalties, and it's a crapshoot when it comes to penalties. So what else could they have done outside of scoring a goal?
Yeah, Michael Bradley could have taken the penalty better.
Justin Morrow could have not hit the damn bar.
Yeah, you know what?
Stephen Fry, a step more, and he doesn't make that save. entire stride that he made, the 3 little steps to jump to stop that ball with his left hand, a little fraction of a second, and he doesn't get to that ball.
Or Josie gets up another edge so that there's more on the ball too. There's lots of what ifs, right? And it was like it's not a good game, and it really, like, aesthetically, I don't doubt it was that entertaining for the neutral, and that final never is. And I think I said that in the lead up.
Add that to minus 14 degrees Celsius felt on the pitch during the game. Dwayne, have you noticed the entire first touches in the entire game on both teams? Every first touch was off. The ball was probably frozen at that point. It was like a weird display of errors at a lot of points in the game.
Yeah. And I said it to Rudi off the top. It is the narrative, and it is just a narrative, but the Steph Fry. But I mean, I think, and I don't know how many others TFC people would think this, but I do think that the fact that Stephen Fry was the hero on the night for Seattle does actually make it a little easier to tolerate too, because he played such a big role in this club through some of those dark days. 99 caps, and it always frustrated TFC fans that he wasn't given the opportunity, because they were out of the playoffs at the end by Ryan Nelson, wasn't given the opportunity to come off the bench and get that 100th cap, and it sort of always felt that was unfair. But nonetheless, I guess maybe he got his revenge, obviously, and you're happy for him, because, as I said, he's a guy that spent a lot of time here. I look back, and there's a lot, obviously, in the old brain box rattling around about the night, and there's a lot of memories tied into the whole weekend that make it hard to separate. But I'll tell you that, just off the top, the 2 most positive memories, and the 2 memories that I will probably keep with me for a long time, are almost on opposite ends of the game. The first is just simply singing "O Canada." I am not a guy that gets tears up on anthems and stuff like that generally, but I got to tell you, the emotion of having that many Torontonians and Canadians standing there singing, belting out that song as a
the entire stadium was basically.
Yeah, which they do every game, but it's not sung like that every game, right?
Oh no, there's no passion like there was on Saturday. And by the way, you can listen to the crowd sing "O Canada" on the MLS Cup audio diary that came out yesterday on the network. You can listen to a few moments recorded from inside the stadium, including the entire raw sound of the crowd reacting to the penalty shootout.
Yeah, there you go.
You never hear like a silence that loudly, I have to say.
Yeah, I was out of the stadium in 90 seconds, and there were a lot of people doing the same thing. I did not actually see Seattle celebrate. I turned as soon as I heard the Seattle crowd roar. Where I was standing, it was hard to see the net. Like, I really couldn't see the net during the penalties. So I just bolted out. But anyway, the other moment that I actually had, it was in the penalty shootout, and it was when Seattle was coming up to take their 5th penalty. And of course, at that particular time, Toronto was in the driver's seat. Had they stopped that penalty, they would have won the championship. And that is as close as a Toronto team has come to winning a championship. That 30 seconds or so that it takes to take that penalty, and it obviously went in, so they kept going. But that 30 seconds was as close as a Toronto team has come to winning a championship in over 20 years. And there was a lot of sort of pent up passion that came out at that very moment, in the hopes that maybe we might be about to see something very special. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but those emotions of those 30 seconds, as I said, still were worth experiencing. And I asked Rudi the question of who I think he thinks is best set up for next year. And I got to tell you, and I don't think I'm looking through this for rose-colored glasses. I do think TFC is amongst the top 2 or 3 favorites to win the MLS Cup next year. And obviously, we now know intimately, Torontonians and TFC fans do, that winning the MLS Cup is a bit of a lottery as well. So they'll have to get lucky in the playoffs. They'll have to get hot at the right time. They'll have to stay healthy like they did again. But that is a roster, regardless of who they lose today, and we'll talk a bit about the expansion draft in the next block, that is very well set up. And, Tim Bezmerchenko deserves a lot of credit. He was, you talk to analytics, Kevin, he was bashed, torn apart for that analytics conversation that he had back 2-3 years ago. I remember people just making fun of the fact that he was talking about different types of analytics they use, and just completely dismissing the possibility that this guy could possibly know what he was doing. I think part of that's because Bezmerchenko doesn't really look like a jock, right? He looks like a professor, even though he was a jock. Anyway.
Well, they say geek rule the world, so.
Yeah, exactly. He played professional soccer for a year, although I don't think he was, on the upper end of that cusp or any means. I don't think he had a glorious career. It was in USL. At any rate, Kevin, you were an outsider in it. Obviously, we talked before the game, the day before, about how you were kind of in a weird position, similar to myself in the CCL, in which you're obviously not a TFC partisan. So, but you're still around it, so you're swept up into it a little bit. What was the experience like for you?
Cold, but that's something totally different. It was quite impressive. The crowd, the reaction, the atmosphere was very loud. It was a nervous crowd as well, every opportunity. And the Seattle Sounders fan, from where I was sitting, totally across and the really high up across the Seattle Sounders fan, I could actually hear the reaction with a little delay. And it was really impressive to see the game. A lot of mistake. First touches were off for both teams, led to some grindy and really physical soccer, which it's normal in not necessarily just the weather because it was really cold and windy. It is because of the moment, the pressure, the championship, the defensive responsibilities, where you don't want to be the guy that causes the mistake, that causes the goal, that makes you lose the game. And that's a big pressure weighing on everybody's shoulder. And we've seen this. And the longer the game went, the more I thought Seattle were going to steal with how they did. I'm not saying they pulled a grease, but they won the MLS Cup without having a shot on target. So that is quite impressive.
Yeah, look, the from the crowd, I think a lot of people talking about the negativity of Seattle were more the TV viewers, and that it didn't have that feel to me in the crowd that Seattle was completely being shelling up. I knew that they were, but I did think that they looked dangerous on the breaks at times. They just weren't able to convert it, and I think credit goes to TFC's defense, which is I said in the lead up. You asked me on the Friday show or the Saturday show, the special show we did on Saturday. You asked what I would do if I was Seattle, and I sort of implied that what Toronto had to do is they had to store up the defense over the run, and they did for that game. So credit goes out to them. I don't know though. It's a final. I don't think you can really. And I've always said this. I've said this many times in many different forms that it's a fool's errand to try and capitalize the season in a single game at any point, and that includes the final. It's no more a reflection of the entirety of TFC's season than any single game. It just was the one that ended it, and at least they were ending on the final day that they possibly could have. And as difficult as it might be right now for many TFC fans, and a lot has to go there, but if they do get the job done in the next few years or whenever it takes, it will make that moment even sweeter than it would have been last night, because now you can add the loss of the final at home to part of the TFC legend, the TFC narrative, the TFC story, which continues on. And I'm just happy that there's stable and successful professional soccer in my community for the first time, probably in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime.
At least they're not going to fold after winning a championship or getting close to it, which is the case for some teams in North American soccer as we speak.
Yeah, well, yeah, may they rest in peace. Okay. I'll go here with that in terms of the roster. The one question I did give her, and this is the caveat to what I said a minute ago, is the Javenko stuff. And I don't know what to think of that tweet. It does strike me as a bit of someone that's not completely on. This is what I worry about. It sounds like he's not completely on board with something to do with the club management right now. And I don't know what that's about, because I don't think you say that unless you have an issue. You generally don't go through the media for stuff like that. And that's the most troubling aspect of that for me. So plug your ears, TFC fans. My take on Javenko is less rosy than Rudi's is. I think it's something closer to 60-40, and I'm not sure which way that goes. Maybe 60 stay, just because the money's so big, and a little bit of a step away and vacation is probably going to be good for his soul, and he might come back a little more refreshed. But that's where I'm at with that, and obviously the Bradley question as well. And changing it's very difficult for TFC to make a change with one of those three DPs right now, unless they're forced into it, because how do you not try and finish the job next year without a current roster, right?
Well, yeah, your window is going to be probably next year, and then it's up in the air. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts, Kevin?
No, I think it's pretty good. We had a good show with Jonathan yesterday as well. If you want to hear a breakdown of the game, how it went down, Soccer Today from yesterday with Jonathan Tannenwald.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll move into our off season.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back. And MLS is a cruel league sometimes in the sense that
the day after the game, people get released.
Exactly. It happens every year. So, Sounders players were getting told hard stories. The TFC players were getting told hard stories just after they gave it all on the pitch. But nonetheless, that's where we're at right now. And let's start with the expansion draft and focus in on the Canadian teams. And we've been talking TFC for the entire show, and obviously for good reason. But let's move to Montreal first in this case, and then go to Vancouver. Then we'll finish up with TFC and have a quick look at the unprotected list and see if there's anything that surprises you. Oduro's on there, but he is a free agent.
Yeah, free agents are automatically on the unprotected list unless they're signed, or that's a lot of questioning, and the rules are not necessarily easy. Let's just put the rules out there. You cannot lose more than one player. So if Atlanta selects one player, well, Minnesota's not going to pick one player from you. Only one player can be lost. So sometimes there's a gamble. You have one big name to attract maybe somebody, and the other ones are there because you think they're not going to get taken. And we'll see. If you look at the Montreal unprotected side, Patrice Bernier is a name that really stands out, but it's a gamble because you do have players like Callum Malice on this list. And I have a feeling Harry Shipp as well. Those two players are highly touted. And speaking with colleagues during the MLS Cup, Callum Malice is very well perceived, especially in Northern United States, in the Eastern Conference, or maybe in a place like Minnesota. Callum Malice would make a lot of sense for Minnesota, and that is the general feeling of what could potentially happen. But Harry Shipp having a lot of upside as well, a young American midfielder, could be a wise decision as well. Those are the two names, maybe not the sexiest on the list, because you do have a Didier Drogba. Yes, he's not going to be taken by anybody. He's not going to come back and play in MLS. But a Patrice Bernier or another Michael Salazar. But no, I feel it's going to be either Malice or Harry Shipp if any players are selected from the Montreal unprotected list.
Yeah, Malice was the name that jumped out for me off of that. Shipp, obviously, but I think Shipp's probably like with TFC, one of those calculated risks that they figure. Well, also with Shipp, he didn't have the best of seasons either. I don't think he struggled a little bit, so they might be just even willing to lose him. But I think Malice is the likely one to go there. It's an MLS lifer, right? It's one of those guys, and I think he'd be a benefit to any of those teams that are playing. But that's the problem.
He came through the ranks of the Montreal Impact and then selected in the Super Draft a few years ago, and having a nice, good career. But still, his upside are still maybe to come. His best years are still to come. So he might be one of those players that is worthy to take a shot at.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Bernier, that's just the sake of probably Bernier wants to play another year. But if someone were to select him and they weren't able to get him back to Montreal, he'd probably just retire. And I think most teams would understand that. So that he's unlikely to be picked. And obviously Drogba's not getting picked because everyone knows he's going.
Montreal did pick Brian Ching though in 2012. So maybe Houston's gonna pull the exact same thing on the opposite side. That is a trick that a lot of teams will sometimes do, where they will pick a player. They will pick a player that they're not going to get to try and hold the other team hostage for allocation. And it's a dirty pool a little bit, but it's been done dating way back to the early expansion drafts. TFC did it. That's one of the reasons they struggled so much in the first year, is they wasted the expansion draft. But I don't really need to go on a Mo Johnston rant today. Let's move to Vancouver. Anyone jumping out for you here? David Egger, Marcel Dion are both on the list, as is Fraser Aird. Vancouver hates Canada. Giles Barnes. There's Pedro Morales. Blas Perez. So no, it'll be interesting. Poor Paulo. Paulo Tornaghi is always on those lists, but he's never taken and he's never playing. So poor Paulo. But no, I don't think anybody's going to take a chance on Fraser Aird, but David Edgar maybe. That's a name that if I was Atlanta or Minnesota, I would take a hard look at David Edgar.
Yeah, you know what? Blas Perez might have some value to a team too, as a sort of third attacker or fourth attacking option. But maybe an expansion team might not want to be thinking that. Atlanta might, because Atlanta has a lot of attacking power, so that would be something interesting there. Barnes as well. He's had some success in the past in Houston. I sometimes think that might have been a one-shot deal there, but another interesting attacking option for the Whitecaps. So I guess we'll go back up to Toronto FC, the Eastern Conference champions. Irwin obviously is what to talk about here. Will Johnson's going through free agency. He probably won't be selected. Lovitz has been selected before and then traded back to TFC. So there you go. I look at this list and I think Mark Bloom, Beitashour, obviously, and that is stunning to me. The Beitashour's on this list, but he's, you say Irwin, I say Beitashour is the more interesting and more likely target because fullbacks are often hard to find, good ones anyway. So that's my risk there.
Possibility, but there's a very high possibility that one of those two players is not coming back. And if you're a team looking for a goalkeeper, like Minnesota, looking for a lot of players on the roster, and Clint Irwin is your safe bet, where it's not millions of dollars, it's a few $100,000, and he's a very well not traveled, but he's experienced in the league, and he got through some challenges with Colorado, then moved to Toronto to establish himself as a very good goalkeeper in the league. So that might be a possibility if you're in Minnesota looking at Clint Irwin. If you're Atlanta and you need a defender, and Atlanta decide to pick him first, not necessarily first overall, but in one of the rounds they have the priority over Minnesota, could be interesting.
Yeah, precisely. It goes at 2:00 today. So by the time many of you listen to this in podcast form, it will all be done. We'll obviously break that down tomorrow, but let's move on now to talk a little bit about the Champions League. Let's move off MLS for a second and look at the Champions League draw. What matchups jump out at you, Kevin?
Arsenal, Bayern Munich. You're like, yay, Arsenal wins the group, and they're gonna face Munich. Oh, boom.
Well, yeah, that was obviously the story, kind of the hidden story in there, is how it just played out this year, in which finishing second was actually a benefit to you. I mean, even a team like Barcelona and Barcelona's probably going to handle PSG, but they're trickier than probably they want around a 16 match. Sevilla-Leicester is a fascinating matchup too, simply because one of those two teams is going to be in the quarterfinals.
Leicester got lucky once again with the draw, and that's because the seeding, and they won their group with a lot of points, and they could not face a team from their country, and they could not face a team from their group, but their group sucked, so that didn't come into play. But they got lucky with the draw too, partly facing not necessarily one of the weakest side, but on the weaker side of the spectrum that the teams are left.
And but the luckiest team of all in the draw was the team that I support. Monaco, Manchester City, that I think was the softest touch that they could have gotten, and there were a lot more difficult touches out there. They could have got Juve, they could have got Madrid, Atleti Madrid. It might not have been pretty if that had happened the way City's playing right now, so that at least gives them an opportunity. And based on the results of the weekend, which, talk about my Saturday, maybe not my best weekend I've ever had.
No,
anyway.
Exactly. Leicester destroying Manchester City. Vardy with a hat-trick is first in the Premier League.
Yes. I'm not going to break that game down. There's nothing to break down. They just had their ass handed to them, and it's kind of a weird little stretch for City right now. So that was a nice little gift that we're given, because the point I was making is I think that they probably internally are already sort of refocusing their focus on the season, refocusing their focus. I'm an articulate guy, aren't I? On the Champions League as opposed to the league, because I think bluntly that they might have lost the league with just two back-to-back losses. I mean, that's how tight the Premier League is right now. It's going to be a long stretch back. They're going to need to nearly be perfect, I think, to have a chance to win the title, even just this many points down this early. Any other thing jumping out there? We'll quickly go through Real Madrid, Napoli. That's an interesting matchup in terms of, Napoli's a decent side, but Real Madrid would be the favorite there, obviously. Benfica and Dortmund. probably the end of the road for Portugal there. Monaco, Arsenal, as you said, Porto and Uve, Leverkusen and Atleti, which is that's a very good matchup actually in terms of if you like your soccer, you like that, and then you have your PSG, Barcelona, and Sevilla, Leicester, as we said already. Also, the Club World Cup going on right now. Kevin, I haven't even really thought of it, but
exactly. Well, you have the Europa League as well. Draw interesting. Manchester United versus Saint Etienne, so that's going to be a fun match, and well, who knows? Maybe Saint Etienne can pull out the upset.
That team, if you're new to the sport, has a fascinating history. They were probably the best team in France for many years in the 70s for a long stretch. So great history there for that club. So good for them.
Yeah, Saint Etienne in the outskirts of the banlieue de Paris, so not too far away. But if I'm not mistaken, not necessarily the best France geographic knowledge, but an English speaker for that matter. But what's interesting to me in it's going to get. The favorites are going to be there long in the tournament this year. Like there's no Man City, Barcelona, or Man City, Real Madrid in the round of 16. And for me, that's the interesting factor is, look, big teams are going to be there in the quarters, and that's going to be amazing matchups.
Yeah, there's going to be some power matchups in the quarterfinals for sure. Quickly on the Club World Cup, we'll finish the show with this. The Ketchum Antlers and Atleti Nacional are the two teams that will be playing in the one semifinal to play the winner of Club America, Real Madrid. Obviously we know who the favorites are in those games, but Club America, finally a Mexican team with a shot against one of the big clubs, and that's certainly within Mexico. That would be a matchup that they are probably craving a lot. The one of the world's greatest teams, obviously Real Madrid, with what I believe is the most successful and greatest team from North America region in America. So interesting matchup there. But I don't know if I think we probably talked about it last year a bit, but I don't know what to think of this tournament. It always creeps up on you. We always forget about it. I mean, especially this year.
Yeah,
but,
and the format too. It's because there's like those type of team can play each other. The winner will play the better team, then the winner will play the big team. It's like, you really want to do a Club World Cup, just do two pools of like 4 teams, 2 moves on or something. Because you want to have those matchups. You don't necessarily just want to get there and your club, you get eliminated, you lose your first game, you're out. I think it has to be rethought in the format of it. The idea, the concept, the philosophy behind it, that's fine. But I think you have to find a way to make it better than just, okay, this team has a bye there. No, make one pool. I don't know, because you probably have to limit the amount of teams. Make one pool of 5. Everybody play one game against each other. And then there's a semis and a final, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, the thing that always strikes me, and I always say this to people that always push the whole, like, you got to win the CCL, it's more important in the league because you can one day play Barcelona stuff, is that you're not anywhere close to guaranteed to be playing Barcelona if you make the Club World Cup. You got to win your quarterfinal. And truthfully, the CONCACAF teams usually don't. So it is a bit of a surprise that Club America is in this thing right now. So good for them, though. And it'll be obviously a fun game for their supporters to watch, even though it's probably a bit of a lost cause. It's only in the history of the competition a non-canonical UEFA final has only happened once, is what I'm trying to say. And it was an African club that I forget what they were named right now. Sorry about that, but it didn't really change
and
anyone's
for America
interest.
Dwayne, for America to win, or just to get to the final, they have to beat Real Madrid. So it might not even happen this year again.
They've won. Yeah, they've won what they wanted. Really, that matchup's really what it's there for. That's, to me, the win already, and winning that quarterfinal to get to that match. But anyway, yeah, it's I should like it more. It also doesn't help that it's usually on at like 3 a.m. and stuff. These games are 5:30 in this case, but
it's been in Japan or Marrakesh for the last 5-6 years. So it's been like the other side of the world.
Yeah, I think that the one way that this might be better off is if they did actually put it in North America, which would probably mean them playing inside if you wanted to get near the major centers, but you could maybe go to LA and play it there. But that might help a little, but it's still an uphill battle. I guess I've always thought, though, to one final thought in this, that what would be really worthwhile and what would really draw a lot of attention and what really is needed is a Women's Club World Cup. That would help the women's game immensely, and I think that would matter in the women's game in a way that this simply doesn't in the men's side.
That's actually a good idea, especially maybe in the next few years, because now there's not a lot of club or not enough. But no, it's a good concept that we should think about for sure.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we move on. Everything moves on. The world goes round and round and round, and we figure it all out, folks. TFC did not win the MLS Cup. Congratulations to the Seattle Sounders. I'll answer my question that I gave Rudi. Yes, they're worthy champions because they won, and that is all you need to do to be a worthy champion. Frustrating for TFC, but as I said, the world will go round and round. Till that time, Kevin, as always, you say goodbye.
Tomorrow, 11 a.m. for live soccer today. And until then, have a great soccer.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.